Hey guys, welcome to this week's Midweek Moment. Now, today we're starting a whole new series. It's called Hidden Gems. And what we're doing is we're looking at different and unique characteristics of God that we see throughout Scripture and what they mean and how they apply to us. And if you're in-house, or maybe you can even see it a little bit behind me, we've got like this new backstage drop that Maddie crushed, just laying out some of these hidden gems that we're going to dive into over the next couple of months. And tonight we're talking about light. We're talking about what it means to be light of the world, and who the light of the world is. And so to talk about light, first we have to talk about dark. We have to talk about darkness. Like, what things come to mind when you think of dark, right? Sometimes I think of nighttime. Sometimes I think of scary movies. Sometimes I think of Northeast Ohio and how it's always dark like 9 months out of the year. Sometimes I think about COVID and it's how it's like this really dark space or dark time in our existence. But darkness does a few different things. One of those things is darkness can cause fear in us. You see, back in caveman days, before like we had invented light bulbs and stuff like that, nighttime was a time when like scary things came out and played, right? Like if you were a caveman and the sun went down and it was total dark, that's when like all the predators started coming out, and you were fearful of what you couldn't see. And maybe you've been like that. Maybe you've been in a dark space where there was no light, and then all of a sudden you start hearing these different noises, right? Plays games with you. It gets inside of your head. You start to think up all these crazy scenarios about the boogeyman coming to get you, or there's a tiger outside your window. I don't know. But darkness plays tricks on the mind, and it can stir up fear within us. Darkness also just totally whacks out our senses, right? I talked about just a second ago how it can make us think we hear things. In 1962, there was this French scientist who threw a bunch of people into caves, himself included. He went into the cave too. And they put all these people into caves that were totally void of any kind of light. And they were in these caves for weeks and sometimes even months at a time. Now, the crazy thing about this is there's a few different things that happen. One, everybody's sleep cycles were just out of whack. Instead of, like that normal sleep 8 to 10 hours and then be awake for, 12 to 14 hours, most of the participants in this experiment transitioned to like a 36 and 12 sleep cycle, which meant that they were awake for 36 hours and then slept for 12 hours, just going to show that natural light is so important for our internal biological clock. The other thing that came out of that study is people who were exposed to prolonged periods of darkness started to suffer from hallucinations and even depression. And here's the deal. Here at the end of the experiment, this was totally blew me away. But over that experiment, when they pulled people out, most of the participants were super surprised that the experiment was over. Most of them thought they had weeks, if not a month, left down in isolation. Now, see, when we look at Scripture, Scripture often refers to darkness as a sinful path. Spiritually blind people usually are referred to as living in darkness. John chapter 3, verses 19 and 20 says, God's light came into the world, but people loved the darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil, and all who do evil hate the light and refuse to go near it, for their sins will be exposed. And so a lot of times in Scripture, we see darkness kind of used as the illustrative for people who are walking in sin, who are living a sinful life. They're walking ignoring the good news of Jesus. They're walking ignoring the great goodness and grace of God. And so that darkness is a picture of what it means to walk in sin. Now, light, on the other hand, if you go back to Genesis, we see that God actually creates both light and darkness. And if you think about it, you can't really have light without darkness. I mean, think about that for a moment. Like, the reason that darkness exists is because there is a void of light. And when light shines, you're able to see light because of the darkness that once was. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. had this great quote. He said, "Only in darkness can you see the stars." Have you ever experienced that? Like, if you go out into the country where the skies are wide open and there's not a lot of city lights out, right? You can see the stars so much clearer than if you are in a big city that has lots of like street lights and man-made lights. See, those lights kind of make it harder to see the stars in the sky. But when you're in that void, when you're in that space where there's no artificial light, those stars just shine so much brighter. Because of the darkness, you're able to see the stars. Now, I just talked about creation a second ago. In John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, there's this really beautiful depiction of Jesus coming to earth. Okay, it's kind of poetic. John writes this to open up his gospel narrative of Jesus. And in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, this is what John writes. He says, "In the beginning, the Word already existed." Okay, when he says the Word, he's talking about Jesus. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. So John's saying that Jesus has always existed. Jesus was there at the very beginning of all of creation. Verse 3, it says, "God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." Have you ever walked into like just a pitch black room, right? And then you start fumbling for your phone because everybody's trying to turn on their flash camera, the flashlight on the back of your phone, right? And there's something beautiful that happens when you walk into that dark space and you can't see, and then there's that moment of relief where like the light comes on and boom, I can see, right? And light does this amazing thing where it just pushes out darkness. Now, maybe this isn't that big of a deal to you on camera, but if we were sitting in a pitch black room and that was the only thing that popped on, man, that would have illuminated a huge amount of space for you to be able to see and know what was happening. You see, walking in darkness is not good. And what's worse is walking in darkness and not even knowing it. Remember that John 3 verse that we quoted just a few minutes ago? It talked about how people refused to come near to the light because they didn't want their darkness to be exposed. They don't want their darkness, their sins, to be exposed. Here's the deal, guys. Darkness can't be normal. We can't normalize darkness, and sadly, some of us have been walking in darkness for a while. Some of us slowly stepped into darkness, and we got used to darkness, and sooner or later, we allowed that darkness to consume us. We took little pleasure after little pleasure, and we took all this selfishness, and we started taking it, our desires, and adopting them, and craving them, and chasing after them, and then letting them become normal in our lives, and darkness cannot become normalized in our lives. We have to let the light expose the darkness. In John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus says this. He says, "I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life." I don't want to walk in darkness. I know you don't want to live in darkness. My hope and prayer for you is this, that if you've been in a dark place, maybe you've got some depression, some anxiety that's been giving you problems that you've been trying to wade through, or Satan's really attacking you mentally, man, invite the light into that darkness. Maybe you've got some sort of sin cycle that you've been caught in. Maybe you've allowed certain things into your life because, man, it's what you want to do, or you think it might feel good or be good in the moment, and you've invited that sin into your life, and now that sin has led you to this darkness, and that darkness has become normalized. Man, let Jesus into that space. Come back to the light. The good news is that Jesus offers us a light that leads to life. Jesus took on your darkness so that you don't have to live with it. And Jesus has already defeated your darkness. Like, let's think about that for a moment. Like, whatever you're dealing with, whatever you're working through, Jesus has already beaten that. Let the light be the life that lives within inside of you. Invite Jesus in. Let Jesus become the thing that pushes you forward. Let Jesus become the thing that pushes the darkness out as you walk closely with him. Now, here's the deal, guys. Like, sometimes you got to let people into this conversation. And so if you want to reach out to us and send us a message, or shoot us an email, or however you want to reach out, like, just let us walk alongside of you as you navigate this stuff, as you allow light into your life, as you allow Jesus to push out the darkness and as you walk with him, guys. We're so glad that you guys were tuning in and have joined us. Thanks so much for being here. God bless you guys, and have a great week.